Executive compensation is a hot-button issue in the charitable sector. According to IRS charity regulation, nonprofits can provide reasonable compensation, which is defined as the value that would ordinarily be paid for services by like enterprise under like circumstance. The issue is that the IRS has no standard formula, such as a percentage of total revenues or expenses for determining compensation. And there's no tables or schedules that help define reasonable compensation for an organization. So it's all based on the facts and circumstances of that case if the IRS is investigating. But the penalties are quite steep. It can range from fines all the way to revocation of tax-exempt status. In this presentation, we're going to discuss the case for lowering or capping executive compensation, as well as the case against it. And we'll start with the case against lowering executive compensation. Strong leadership at the helm of a nonprofit is critical for mission success. They are the voice and the face of an organization, both internally and externally. Consultant Joan Gary has a great quote about this. She says, not every dollar paid to the CEO is pulled away from achieving the mission. And I think what I have found is that it's quite contrary to that, actually. A great CEO helps achieve the mission in a more effective, larger way for a longer period of time. They're essentially helping achieve the mission faster. I think we've all been inspired by good leaders, and we know what they can achieve and what they can bring out of us. So compensating these individuals appropriately for their expertise and their experience helps deliver on the mission and organizational goals. It aligns with their job description, and it serves the charitable purpose of the organization. One thing that's worth pointing out is that there's a lot of opportunity for these people to leave nonprofits and go over to the private sector, especially with the rise of hybrid organizations like LC3s and B Corps, and just generally social responsibility among the corporate sector, which means that turnover is high, both within the sector and leaving the sector, and that costs a significant amount of money for nonprofits, and that's something not to be avoided in this conversation. In fact, a 2014 survey of nonprofit employment practices found that the top 2 staff retention issues that were cited were inability to pay competitively and inability to promote. So a lot of this problem starts internally and grows over time. Blue Avocado has found that nonprofits typically pay 20 to 40% less than their counterparts at foundations, government, or for-profit entities. What we also know is that executive salaries serve as the ceiling at an organization. So if an executive director's salary is kept low, salaries across the board are going to be kept low. And this is, again, feeding that turnover issue and costing the organization more money over time and affecting the organization's ability to deliver on mission. Congress recently weighed in on this issue as well. I think we can all remember the 2018 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. There was a nice little piece in there for us nonprofits as well. They've imposed a 21% excise tax on nonprofits that pay compensation above $1 million to any of their top 5 highest paid employees, because they believe that diverts resources from the exempt purposes. It is an issue that we've seen in the sector, certainly among sectors like higher education and healthcare nonprofits, that there are larger gaps in pay between executives and lower level employees. I feel, though, that this is not a particularly prevalent issue among the sector. There was a study in 2014 that polled 100,000 nonprofits and only found that 2,700 of them actually paid any employees over $1 million. And that was among 1.4 million registered charities. So although I think it's an important issue to consider, it is a small number of organizations that we're talking about in the aggregate. So there are several things that we should do to support nonprofits and executives to improve salaries, the work experience, reduce turnover, and provide alternative or creative compensation packages to keep people at the organization serving the mission. The first is to use wage benefits surveys and set salaries based on your location, so it's fair to where you are and what you need to live in that environment. The next is create a rule book for how the organization determines salaries and raises. so that employees understand what's happening. It's fair across the board and a very transparent process. The next is to analyze the wage gap at the organization, which some organizations might already have to do for funders, but it's a great practice to kind of maintain on an organizational level as well. It's also important to develop a plan with the board to maintain or bring up salaries over time to industry averages, again, to address this turnover issue and have a plan. And then finally, making it a part of the budgeting process every year to address the executive director's salary. So this really starts at the top with the board and with leadership, and it's going to trickle down to the rest of the staff and benefit the organization.
So now we are going to argue two cap compensation. So a little known fact, to be in the top 1% in America's class system, on average you'd be making around $400,000. This does vary by state, so in New York it's higher, it's at $700,000, but in no place is the average to be 1% over $1 million. So one could argue that anyone seeking for more pay beyond this, like $1 million, is doing it out of self-interest. And you don't want that person leading your nonprofit, because you're going to have a case like United Way CEO William Aramoni, who stole over millions of dollars and was sent to prison for 7 years out of his self-interest. So the nonprofit sector is often compared to the private sector in this argument, but the nonprofit sector isn't the for-profit sector. It doesn't work for private financial gains. And there are some parts of the private sector one shouldn't want to be correspondent to their nonprofit organization. So in the for-profit sector, too often you have the CEO or president making millions off their company, while there are people running it are barely making a livable salary. So for example, it just came out that the CEO of Walmart is making $22 million a year, while the median salary from Walmart is about $19,000 a year. And also since the nonprofit sector is often compared to the for-profit sector, let's compare it to the public sector. So for the federal government, congressmen usually makes about $174,000. It would be higher for majority minority leaders or Speaker of the House, but just a little more. And then for state level, governors range from under 100,000 to a little above 200,000, but nothing really more than that. So too often the nonprofit sector sees leaders of organizations taking advantage of their nonprofits, like the CEO of United Way. But there have been some laws and policies put in place to prevent and answer these situations. So like we talked about, the tax reform bill. Also, this does affect taxpayers. So we have a case where Governor Cuomo issued an executive order to limit the amount of money an organization can give to their CEO or leader depending on how much state funds they get from the government. So, but sometimes these policies and laws do not work effectively enough to prevent leaders from taking advantage of the organization's finances. So we learned about private inurement and excess benefit transactions. And we know that there are laws and codes implemented to prevent this from happening. And we know that the state attorney generals are the ones who are tasked with the enforcement of these laws and answer to them. But state attorney generals aren't perfect either and are constrained by limited resources. So they're not really able to attend every case. So you could say that capping salaries could prevent organization leaders from taking part in private inurement and excess benefit transactions. So as you can see, compensation for nonprofit organization leaders is a complicated issue due to the nature of the sector. So on the one hand, you don't want organizations missing out on talent due to higher salaries in the for-profit sector. But on the other hand, the purpose of nonprofits is, and the reason why they're tax-exempt status, is to promote a public purpose. So it could be argued that paying a CEO a 7-figure salary wouldn't be going along with that trait. There are ways that organizations are working to answer this question. The board should be working with the CEOs and leaders to decide on a reasonable salary. We also have watchdogs that are reporting on this, and like we said, the Attorney General. But this will probably continue to be an argument often talked about in the nonprofit sector, especially as it grows.